Hi, I am Katie from Heart's Content Farmhouse, and today I want to show you how to make a really delicious special treat, chocolate chip brioche. Brioche is a French bread, not like a French bread, but like bread from France. And basically what it means is it's an enriched dough, so it has eggs, sugar, butter, and milk in addition to the flour and water, yeast and salt. And that gives it a really soft and tender texture. It gives it a really deep and beautiful golden color. And today we are adding chocolate chips to it, which is just going to make it even better. It's definitely not hard to make brioche at all. The only thing you have to keep in mind is when you enrich a dough by adding any fat or sugar, you are fighting against that dough's ability to rise. So it might take a little bit longer to rise, or it might just mean that you increase the amount of yeast a little bit in your recipe. Today I am using instant yeast, which I use for all of my breads, but in this particular recipe it's especially important because that instant yeast is just so much more active and effective at rising bread dough. So if you use active dry, you certainly can, but you would want to increase it to 2 1/4 teaspoons of full packet of active dry yeast, and your rise times might be a little longer than mine are in this recipe. So a lot of brioche recipes start with warm milk, but I didn't really feel that was necessary since I was using instant yeast, but I did want to go ahead and microwave it just a tad to take off the chill. So I've begun with a 1/2 cup of water, a 1/2 cup of milk, and 4 tablespoons, which is 1/2 stick of butter. I put all those in a Pyrex cup and microwave them on low for 45 seconds, just to sort of take the chill off of those items. And then I dump that whole cup into the bucket of my bread machine. You do not want to knead this by hand. So bread machine or stand mixer is fine, but it is way too sticky to knead by hand, so don't do it. So I dump them into the bucket of my bread machine. Then I add 3 eggs, 3 tablespoons of sugar, 3 1/2 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 1/2 teaspoons of salt, and 1 1/2 teaspoons of instant yeast. So the brand that I like to use is called SAF Instant Yeast. I will link to that below so you can pick it up. Really inexpensive, stores in the freezer. It's all the yeast that you're going to need for over a year of bread baking, so you definitely want to go ahead and invest in it. And then I did this just on the dough cycle of my machine. If you don't have a bread machine, like I said, a stand mixer is fine. Just make sure that you knead it for, I would like to do 5 minutes on, give it a 5-minute rest, and then knead it again for 5 minutes. This is with the dough hook on low. So when it first starts mixing up, it's going to look really wet, like it's going to look like a batter. And then as a few minutes pass, you're going to see that it's tightening up a little bit. Make sure you scrape down the sides of your bowl or your machine so that all of the flour gets in. What you're looking for is a very sticky dough, so it's not going to really clear the side or even the bottom or the sides of the bowl or the bucket. But at the same time, there should be like an actual ball of dough in the center. It shouldn't just be like a complete floppy mess that looks like a batter. If it's not holding its shape at all, go ahead and add a few teaspoons of flour. Let that work in, and if it still doesn't look like that, you can keep adding flour. But I didn't have to add flour when I did it, but I know that the way people measure flour is different, machines act differently. So if yours seems very, very wet, go ahead and add a little bit of flour, a few teaspoons at a time. Once you see that sort of ball of dough form, it's good. Go ahead and let the machine complete its cycle. So we don't want to add the chocolate chips until the very end of this kneading time. If you add them in too early, they will melt and just become sort of incorporated, and you'll just have a brown dough. I did that the first time and it did not work. So wait until the kneading is almost done. So if you're using a bread machine, that means you're going to have to know at what time the kneading cycle is done, and you have to be there ready to pour your chocolate chips in a minute before that time happens. So if that sounds confusing to you, you can just do this with a stand mixer. When the dough looks good, add the chocolate chips, mix them in on low. Now, like I said, brioche can sometimes rise a little bit slower, so make sure you give this a nice warm place to rise. If you have a bread machine, it is going to warm that bucket up just a little bit to help it rise. If you don't, what I like to do is turn my oven on to 100 just for a few minutes, turn it off just so that it's slightly warmed up, and then put the dough in there. Make sure you cover it in a nice clean bowl and give it about an hour to rise, and it should look very puffy and doubled in bulk once it has risen. Now once that happens, it is time for us to divide it and shape it into rolls. Don't make these rolls too big because they're so rich and sweet that having a huge, like, hamburger-sized chocolate chip roll just is not appealing. Again, I did this the first time I made them, and they looked like giant hamburger buns with chocolate chips, and it was just weird. So smaller is better. I did 18 here. If anything, I would say even smaller would be good, like 24. Just make sure it's a number that you're going to be able to fit on a rectangular baking sheet. So you want something that divides relatively nicely, unless you don't care about how they look. So I did 18, and I did 3 rows of 6. Brush them with an egg. This egg wash is going to give them a really extra deep, shiny, beautiful look in the oven. Sprinkle them with sugar. I did some with rough sparkling sugar and then some with pearl sugar. I sort of like the look of having them mixed, but if you don't want to do that, that's fine too. Just an egg wash will work just fine. And then they need to rise. Be really careful at this step because this is a sticky dough. So if you cover these with a tea towel, you're going to come back, and when you lift that tea towel up, it's going to be stuck, and it's not going to be a good situation for you. So I would really recommend doing plastic wrap and just really heavily spraying it with Pam or like another non-stick cooking spray, resting that on top and letting these rise in a warm place. Check them at 30 minutes. Mine took about 45 to rise. Towards the end of your rising time, you want to preheat your oven to 400 and then bake these for anywhere between 15 to 18 minutes. They're going to look very golden because of the egg wash, so be careful that just because they look brown, they may not be done. You're going to check the internal temperature as well. The temperature you're looking for this is going to be about 190. Now you can either serve them right off the pan as sort of like a pull-apart roll, because they are going to rise and form one big, pretty sheet of bread that will pull apart. So you can serve them right out of the pan, or you can remove them to a rack, have them cool, and then put them in a basket. That's totally up to you. But this is a great recipe for a really special breakfast, maybe a Mother's Day brunch or Valentine's Day breakfast, something like that. They definitely have a special occasion feel to them. They are really sweet. They taste more like a dessert, but I just think they would be beautiful at breakfast. Another thing is these freeze very, very well. Most brioche does. So as long as you let them cool completely, and then just wrap them up in plastic wrap, and then again in aluminum foil, or put them in a freezer bag, they will keep very, very well in the freezer for at least a month or 2. You can just defrost them 1 minute per roll in the microwave, and then slightly warm them up in the oven, and they'll be perfect. So you can make them ahead of time, but I would recommend fully baking them and then defrost them. So that is it. Like I said, this is really easy if you have a bread machine or if you have a stand mixer. I just wouldn't recommend trying to do it by hand because it's such a wet and sticky dough. And if you look in the description below, I will link my bread machine, and I will also put a link to the blog post that has this recipe that you can print off and keep for yourself. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you try this recipe, and I hope you have a good day. Bye.